This is Emily Wright, Tech Editor and Head of Special Projects of Estates Gazette. I'm calling in for today's chat as part of this Reimagining Real Estate Summit from London. And I don't just have a New York-London call today. I'm actually joined by New York-London guests as well. So I'm delighted to be joined by Mark Ridley, Group Chief Executive of Savills, based here in the UK, in London in fact, and Patrick McGrath, Chief Information Officer and Head of Client Technology, also of Savills, but based just a few miles away over in New York. So how are you both today? How are you getting on?
Very good, thanks, Emily.
Patrick,
it's been a seamless start to our conversation this afternoon. So.
No, never meant to mention that. It's been completely straightforward. It's a technology conference, a real estate technology conference, and the technology has been perfect.
As always.
As always, no, it has been we've got to know each other pretty well as we've tried various platforms, but we're here now, and that's the main thing. That kind of leads me into my first question, really, and that is that it is extraordinary times, which is how we're able to do this. And do a summit in this way. Of course, it throws up some technical issues along the way. But I just want to sort of find out how you've both handled lockdown, both personally and in terms of the business. And Mark, let's start with you. You're back in the office.
Yeah, I'm back at looking over a quiet Regent Street. So shoppers not in abundance yet, but yeah, no, it's not good to be back. I've been sort of working, answering your question, Emily. I've been working out of London and Manchester, sort of on a weekly basis. We reopened in the UK about 7 weeks ago now. And, things are picking up, particularly residentially, but commercially too. It'll be good to see just a bit more footfall outside. We need to sort of see that economic activity pick up.
Well, fingers crossed as lockdown eases, we'll see a bit more of that. So that's London. Let's check out how things are in New York and how things going over there, Patrick, for you. How's lockdown been?
Well, it's been an experience, to say the least. I mean, there's been ups and downs and some challenges and opportunities, but I think to Mark's point, we're all looking forward to getting back into the co-located environment so that we can see each other and kind of create that energy that is more easily done in that environment than in the remote configuration. At the same time, we've been incredibly productive in this distributed environment, and it's been, at times challenging, but it's been a learning process for us all. And I think we're a lot stronger as an organization and a lot more resilient and adaptable as a result of that. So
you mentioned challenging times there. I think that it is fair that everybody has found these times challenging, whether that is personal or professional. So throughout this conversation, we're going to talk about obviously technology and disruption and pre and post pandemic approaches to things. But before we do that, Mark, I wanted to talk to you. It has been a challenging time for the market and for big agencies and brokers around the world, a lot of uncertainty. You have a truly global view from your position. So could you just give us a bit of an overview as to how the business and indeed various markets within the business, I know you mentioned residential there and retail, are responding to different challenges, because it's different around the world. The situation in Europe and the UK is not the same as situation then again is not the same in the US. So how's it looking from your perspective?
Okay. Can I start the chronology? Really, if I start in Asia, Emily, then move into EMEA and then into the US, only because that is obviously the chronology of the pandemic itself. Across Asia Pac, in the most cases, we were able to reopen our offices pretty early. What was also quite interesting is everybody wanted to come back to the offices. It was very much a desire to get back, see their colleagues, as Pat had talked about, and also see the clients and make sure we were servicing the clients as best we could. So we ended up back quite quickly, particularly across China, at about 100% occupancy, 90 to 100% occupancy, rather quickly. Residential markets held up across China as well during the pandemic, and as they emerged, they picked up. And commercial activity picked up probably 2 to 3 weeks after the lockdown was released. So we picked up quite quickly across that region. I would say the same would be true in Korea and in Vietnam, where they picked up significant activity and got good momentum quickly. Perhaps slightly less momentum, but getting stronger nonetheless across Australia, and other markets like Singapore, where they'd had further lockdowns. Obviously, that sort of, if you like, so took away some of the momentum to start with, but it's now picking up. And Japan also the same, good activity restored in Japan. So I think we've seen confidence return. In terms of what it means for sectors, Emily, I would say the retail markets took the longest to recover. So footfall in the shopping centres, started hesitantly, particularly, F&B was, again, people eating out. That took some encouragement. But it's actually the footfalls have increased gradually, and the retail spend, the basket, has increased. To actually, in money markets, it's back at the pre-COVID-19 levels. So that's encouraging. So we're seeing the consumer is definitely coming out of hibernation. So positive overall, momentum picking up, I would suggest, and I hope it will continue. I know we're worried now that Hong Kong may lock down again because of a spike, and I think we've got to be get used to the fact there will be recurrences, over the period. Mm-hmm. Europe was interesting because actually some of the most impacted countries have actually recovered quite well. Spain in particular has recovered well. Germany has continued its economic sort of balance, and that's picking up well too. And actually the northern parts of Europe, from Netherlands through the Nordics, they're also experiencing good response as the markets unlock. I think the winner across all those regions would be logistics. So logistics, manufacturing, distribution has been a particular interest to all involved. And the demand, I think the ever increasing e-tail against retail, we've seen that accelerated change as more and more people have shopped online. And I think as much as it may be a bounce, it may settle at a much higher level than previously was the case, pre-COVID-19. So logistics is a winner. Life sciences is definitely a winner as well. Actually, multifamily or PRS, that's also been a winner. That's continued, and obviously, rental recovery out of occupiers in PRS has been strong. Offices, which I know we'll talk about later. Offices, I think we've seen different reactions in different markets. But what I would say, before we sort of go into too much detail now, I would say that rents in the Grade A space, Grade A offices, have maintained themselves at pretty much pre-COVID-19 levels. We've seen increased incentives, but what we haven't seen is a very significant supply equation, i.e. people putting a lot of space back on the market. We haven't seen that in Asia Pac. We haven't yet seen that in Europe or the Middle East. So whilst we may see vacancy rates go up, it's not been a substantial increase, and we haven't got a development oversupply, which was the issue we had in GFC. So I remain optimistic. UK obviously is recovering in line with Europe. There are differences. Obviously, we're a few weeks behind. And then in the US, and I won't steal Pat's thunder, obviously he can talk in detail what he's seeing on the ground there. But again, we're seeing that logistics has been the winner in terms of sector. But again, the stronger states and the stronger cities, tier 1 cities across the US, have maintained momentum from the occupier perspective. So I think it's a cautious but optimistic view I have as to how the markets will react. There will be some significant changes, no doubt, on how we use space, but maybe we can talk about that later on.
Yeah, excellent. That's a good segue into a question that I wanted to ask you. And before I do, Patrick, Mark mentioned there that in terms of the US, obviously it would be remiss of me not to ask you how you're finding it. You're out there in New York. It's been a very hard hit city. And so how are you seeing things sort of slowly, or maybe not so slowly, come back to normal, or well, a semblance of normality?
Well, I mean, there's a New York specific question there. And New York's a complicated market in that it is such a dense configuration of existence. So the concept of distancing, social distancing, and sort of increased space is technically it's very challenging to execute in a market that is that densely built. So we do see, I guess, a variance between markets across the U.S. And to Mark's point, sort of taking that global view and applying that across the U.S., we have certain markets that were first impacted and are now seeing much reduced rates of infection. So that's optimistic. At the same time, we have some other markets that are now seeing resurgence. And I think, at its core, we saw markets like New York essentially apply a handbrake on transactions in the first and second quarter. So while certain transactions have executed, I think there's some question marks around, what pricing will look like and what the supply-demand reset will really mean in terms of occupancy in the more urban core markets in the U.S. At the same time, we're very optimistic about the future of the U.S. economy, and the liquidity that's been pumped into the system is driving, a lot of M&A activity and continued innovation across sectors that have been leaders in terms of employment growth historically for us over the last 10 years. So, those are very positive trends that we're excited about. And our business in the U.S. has historically been focused on really designing the best solutions for the corporate occupier side of the asset marketplace. We're seeing a ton of demand in terms of companies that are looking to fully understand, how they can organize their data, put it in one system, and really drive strategy in terms of, whether it's remote or located office configurations across their workforces. So we've been very busy and like Mark, very optimistic on the New York metro region and the U.S. economy in general long term.
Thank you very much. We're really lucky to have you both on the call today to get that, global view, and then to hear, from you, Patrick, there as well, sort of being out there, hearing firsthand. And you both mentioned there the future of, commercial real estate, looking specifically at offices and how that's changing. Now, Mark, you said recently in a comment piece for Estates Gazette, actually, that we should expect to see long-term behavioural change as people, not just space, must be adaptable and flexible. Can you explain a bit more about what you mean by that and sort of outline your take on decentralized workspaces? It's something that lots of people are talking about. There's been all kinds of, comment on what the future of the office might look like. But from your position, particularly, as I said, looking across the globe, what are your thoughts? And when you talk about, that adaptable and flexible space, what is it that you're seeing?
Okay, thank you. So a couple of things. It does vary from markets, Emily, and I think it's sometimes dangerous to sort of take what is obviously quite a recently changed behaviour and say this is going to be the long-term trend. But there will be some, and how specific and how extreme that will be dependent on the organisation. I suppose what we've seen in most cases is the commitments that occupiers were taking in office space around the world. In the majority of cases, they've continued to take the same amount of space, which you might say, why? Bearing in mind, a lot of discussion around, different models. And the reason I think is because they have decided to take the same amount of space, but occupy it in a less dense format. So people are looking at more amenity space, how they're going to use the space more flexibly, but nonetheless, having the office to be a special place, a space where people want to go and mix with their colleagues. And I think the behavioural piece has been those that have sort of worked up remotely for a significant period of time do find it, the remote becomes even more remote because people do need to collaborate. Younger members of our staff, our workforce, have found it quite hard, particularly in some of those environments where they haven't had good home working facilities. So they've really been keen to go back to the office. And again, mentoring, making sure that actually people can understand how the business is working together, that sense of collaboration is becoming more and more apparent. So I'd say, I think for me, it's so far we're seeing office space still being in demand. Leasing markets in China, Hong Kong, and in Asia Pac have picked up quite significantly. So I don't think it's a long-term demise of the offices. Maybe a couple of things I would say, that those that had disaster recovery facilities, probably what this whole experiment has shown is that you can recover from disasters remotely. So having backup space, you may not need the same amount of backup space, and some functions can work, better remotely. But I think we did a survey during lockdown to a number of respondents across UK and Europe to ask what they felt was the future of the office. And very strongly, 89% of them said that they would still need an office. And again, over 60% said the best place to find collaboration and teamwork was in an office environment. So I think what we will see is people coming in, maybe working more flexibly rather than remotely, maybe a day or two from a different location or from home, if it makes sense, to home, but as opposed to a whole-scale remote platform, because it's, I think it's over a period of time you have to look at that. Mm-hmm. I think overall, though, people will be more flexible in what they do. There'll be more amenities and things like technology, as we discussed earlier, making sure the space is fit for purpose. I think that will be, very strong. And I think that probably means that if there is an impact in the office space, Emily, I would say it's probably in secondary and tertiary offices, which are poorer quality environments. And again, how that fits, maybe quite a lot of it's going to have to either be upgraded or maybe it will change use.
Very much for that. Now, Patrick, what I wanted to talk to you about was what a lot of people have been talking around, which is that this pandemic has potentially accelerated the rate of acceptance, adoption, and development of technology within the real estate sector. I do want to talk to you more about that, because actually you've said a few things during the pandemic and previous to this interview that make me think that maybe there's a bit of more of a nuanced answer to that. But before I do, I want to find out what it's been like being the person kind of, leading the charge on all things digital at Savills, both internal and client facing, during a period of time which is, completely extraordinary, the one that we've been through and are continuing to go through. How have you managed that?
Well, it's definitely been a memorable experience. It's one that I won't forget anytime soon.
I'm sure
I would say it's been it's March 13th is, a day that will live in infamy in my sort of calendar year of 2020. That's the day that we flipped from co-located to remote and distributed. And I'm really lucky at the core on so many different levels to have leadership like, Mark, that have sponsored some of the investments and initiatives that we've made over the last couple of years that have made that transition very easy for our advisory teams. And I'm also lucky to have a fantastic global team and team in North America. We've got great leadership across the UK and European region, Asia Pacific region. There's a good collaborative environment at that level. So we share best practices and lessons learned. And then in the US, just a fantastic team that's helped support. And really, as I described it, the day that we went to remote, I sort of said to the team, like, just a lot of people are going to come now, and you need to greet them with open arms and take them through the process of learning these new tools. If you've been on my team, I like analogies, and I would describe this year as, it's like a race analogy. We showed up and, we thought the weather for race day was going to be one thing, and it was very different, when we showed up to execute the race. We still have to go from point A to point B. The reality is that we value different tools on that journey, and we prioritize different tools on that journey because of the change in the weather that, from what we anticipated to what it actually is. And to be successful as a team, we really have to adapt and reprioritize to win the race. So luckily, like I said, we've got good sponsorship. We invested across the North American platform, what I would describe as a best of breed mobile and cloud-based configuration for our advisory teams. We've got tools like Zoom that, we've that have become kind of ingrained in the business at this point. And we could have a longer conversation about acceleration of adoption and kind of expectations moving forward. But it's hard for me to imagine that in the future, clients won't expect us to be able to competently give a presentation in a remote and distributed fashion with tools like Zoom. Those are just going to be expectations that are now in place for the foreseeable future, and we won't be able to unsee that. And we've got other great partners like Salesforce that help us organize our data. We've got tools like Slack that we've deployed across teams in this remote environment that create transparency around work and collaboration. The UK and European teams have been using Microsoft Teams. We've got tools like Smartsheet, Tableau, Esri, our traditional data partners like CoStar. And we've seen new tools like and new partnerships that we established like Matterport become increasingly important to help with the client interactions across the various different marketplaces and virtual tours. So look, it's memorable. I mean, it's like I described in the beginning. It's been a whirlwind of challenges and opportunities. But the good news is that in those environments, you really do have the opportunity to reassess what's working well and reallocate and redirect resources to the new realities of the world. And ultimately, if we can provide our client and advisory teams with the ability to rebound when things sort of start to move in a more traditional fashion, it's going to accelerate our growth, and it's going to allow us to gain share and build off the foundation of what will be expectations for how we deliver value in the future.
Thank you very much. I mean, you've gone some way to answering my next question, but I'm going to sort of ask it anyway because I'd like some more detail on it. And that is, specifically looking at this idea of acceleration. And I'm wondering whether that's a fair analysis, because on one hand, I think that you've previously said that this period of lockdown could actually have pushed timeframes out a bit in terms of potential adoption, as some companies or tech companies are struggling, therefore it might take a bit longer for their ideas to come through. On top of that, on the real estate side, what are budgetary priorities at the moment? So you've got that on one hand, and then on the other hand, you have this, intrinsic need for remote working that has seen companies the world over collectively realize that they need to be better equipped than perhaps they were for any eventuality in terms of their sort of digital framework. So I'm wondering if that might then act as a catalyst for more tech engagement and a faster adoption on a wider scale going forward when we're kind of through these challenging times. So I suppose the question I'm asking is, would it be fair to say we're going to maybe see a little bit of stagnation just through this difficult time potentially, but then it will be sort of go when things are kind of moving forward at a bit more of a rate?
I think it's a great question, and maybe a good analogy there is like there's a tug of war going on, and the sort of constituents or the aspects of the pull function are really the distributed environment and what we're learning from that, and kind of the expectations that have been crystallized in this environment. So I gave the Zoom analogy, right? Like it's hard to imagine a tool like that won't be just embedded into how people work for the foreseeable future. You could, and some have argued that, a forced adoption may not necessarily have a long-term lasting impact, and there'll probably be some reversion to prior behaviors. And I think people do prefer to meet in person. Like that's always going to be sort of a preference, but the cost associated with that is something that's going to be under a microscope for some period of time, whether that's perceived, psychological risk of getting infected, or the actual, cost of traveling to, be in the room with our team from London per se, or the constraints around whether or not we can do that in the socio-political environment that we're in. So I think that's one factor. I think there's an incredible sort of environment, low cost of equity and the infusion of capital into the marketplace that's probably going to drive a significant amount of M&A activity, not just in the sort of the traditional tech sector across the North American markets, but probably also in some of the sectors that are associated with or ancillary to corporate real estate. And yet in that environment, there's been a repricing of risk. So, when you talk about sort of where the prop tech startup community is, I think that's a hard reality that everybody's grappling with, is, where valuations are and whether the expectations pre-pandemic are even, remotely realistic in the current environment or post-pandemic. So yeah, I mean, if you sort of take a step back, I'd describe it as kind of a tug of war amongst kind of those various different functions. And then there's also the diffusion and adoption curves by service line and by region that we have to factor in. I think directionally, if you think back to kind of like 1999 and 2000, we know where the world is headed. So I don't think there's a lot of debate about where things are going for corporate real estate and the advisory services that are provided across that asset class. I think the question is right now, which teams are going to be successful in managing through these challenges and positioning themselves for the upside scenarios involved in disrupting what is a very large marketplace. And then, just another data point for you. It's very interesting in the U.S. that Lemonade just had an incredibly successful IPO, and then you've got kind of continued demand from investors for new approaches to very traditional and kind of old school industries like insurance. So it's an interesting comp.
Great overview there. Absolutely brilliant. And I think you made some points there that I want to take to Mark, actually, because something that you said, Mark, following the back of the release of Savills Impacts Report, was that we're operating in a more global market now than ever before. Presumably, and I am assuming here, that given the fact that it's now very difficult to travel, and that those restrictions are expected to be in place for a while at least, and certainly between for example the UK and the US, presumably technology has a huge part to play in creating that very global sense of real estate, despite the fact that everybody's kind of quite stuck. Yeah,
they are. They're locked down in various forms, and I think it will continue. And I think what I would say, Emily, the without a doubt, myself included, long-term trend will be probably less extensive travel as regularly. I think that I will still travel as a global CEO when I can, but I'll probably do less trips, but maybe for longer periods of time when I'm allowed. So I think going back to the question around how do we get around that, I think it will be using all the platforms that we have become so used to in terms of how we talk to our clients, how do we talk to our staff, how do we get messages out. And I think the most important thing that probably comes from this is there is a desire for data, there is a desire for knowledge. And I think in this sort of environment, that desire is even greater. So, roles like mine, I have to communicate more rather than less, actually. So I'm doing global newsletters every 2 to 3 weeks to all our staff, telling what's going on in different parts of the world. Same is true with clients. Clients are very keen to know what's going on in the different markets, what we're seeing, how do we use the data? Is that going to be something that they're going to see in their markets? So I think the thirst for knowledge, if you like, has increased. So I think as much as the technology is held up and we will continue to refine how we get messages out, I think there's a desire for greater knowledge, as I say, and we've got to make sure we continue with that. Just one thing I might just mention is because I know we're talking obviously about technology and digital technology. I think one big area that we've seen accelerate, and I think we will be a significant investor in, as we always have been, is smart building technology. Because I think controlling the environment, keeping our staff safe, the welfare of our staff safe in an environment, and all our clients the same. So that's an element of technology has really accelerated, whether it's thermal screening, remote access, robotic cleaning, all of these things, again, air circulation and safety around that. These are things that really the client base that we work with are desperate to have an understanding of what's going on in those markets. So I think technology by its very nature will accelerate in those areas because we've got to make the environment very safe. So yeah, less travel, more virtual, but not entirely virtual.
Thank you very much. We've got a few minutes left, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of pull together the last few questions, if I can, on the hoof into one question that I'm going to get a response from both of you for. And so normally at this point, I sort of ask for final messages, what you want to leave the audience with, whether it's something you've already discussed or something that you've yet to discuss in this conversation, something you think is really important for everyone to go away with. So I'm going to ask you both if you could do that, but kind of thinking along the lines as well, if you will, this is where the question incorporation comes in, of how you think, you know, strategy has changed pre and post, or pre and during, if you like, pandemic. You know, how much are things being redirected? You know, Mark, you said earlier that, you know, you can't sort of say blanket across the board. There's going to be this long-term change. You know, you've got to look at it sort of in a more nuanced way. And I just wonder whether or not the changes that you're seeing pre and post the pandemic are, you know, hugely different, or whether it's just going to be a bit of an adaptation. So 2 questions in one there. I've confused matters, I'm not going to lie, but final thoughts, take into consideration pre and post COVID strategies. Which one of you am I going to start with? You're both thinking, please not me. Well, Patrick, you've made a noise. You ended up on my camera screen first. So Patrick.
So here I go. Yeah, so I want to pick up on a theme that Mark touched on, which is in times of uncertainty, how important the data and the information is to developing the right strategy. And for us, that has been a huge strategic push as an organization to really collect and organize information across the business through partnerships. And today, I'm excited to announce that Savills is the first major global brokerage firm to have a true partnership with CompStack, which is the leading crowdsourced provider of lease comp data across the North American markets. You know, we're partnering with them through our platform Knowledge Cube, and we do, you know, we've seen a significant continued demand from clients and advisors to commercialize that aspect of our platform. We're doing it by, like I said, organizing it and putting it in one place and delivering it through beautiful apps, which is what our Knowledge Cube platform does for the corporate advisory teams. So that's definitely been an area that's you know, continued to shine for the organization. And as we talk, you know, sort of think about what we're learning and doubling down, you know, those are some areas that we're definitely doubling down on.
Thank you very much. And Mark, that final question to you.
Okay.
Question.
Well, I think, Emily, it's been, I started talking about the acceleration of change. I think this has been a continued evolution, or, you know, but it has gone faster. It's moved faster. So, you know, the cyclical change between retail and e-tail has accelerated. How people will use space will accelerate again, and efficiency, you know, will drive that. But I think also sustainability, which was there. You know, there was always, you know, we were moving fast and furious towards, you know, greater sustainability. That's, I think, through the pandemic has become even more accentuated. So I think the efficiency of the buildings, the environment we work in will continue, and that will mean a lot of restructuring of how we use space, no doubt about it, and how we commute. You know, again, things such as, you know, mass transit transportation at the moment is a major handbrake on, you know, some people feeling confident to return to the workplace. So I think, you know, how we use space, where we use it will, you know, come forward. What I would say residentially, it's worth just noting, when we reopened our doors, we were nervous that things would be slow. And actually, we had a record ever month in June. So it shows again that the consumer is still wanting to consume. And interestingly, you know, not surprisingly, perhaps, people wanted more space. They wanted more amenity. They wanted, you know, outdoor space as well as, you know, so a balcony or a garden, you know, important. So I think whilst the long-term trends may not be as great as perhaps some of the commentators are saying, there will no doubt be some changes of lifestyle, changes of how we operate, how we work. And I think our job, Emily, is to look at the real, you know, the built environment, work out what that means, how we adapt the space, how we adapt it for the people that use it. And to us, you know, as a consultant, that's a great challenge. That's fun. You know, life's boring when there's no change. I'm not making little of, obviously, the tragic consequences of the pandemic, don't get me wrong, but I would say to you that the challenge of making the environment safer for everybody is something we've all got to turn our attention to. So yeah, for me, you know, there's an exciting opportunity to get things better for our clients.
Well, that's a great note.
Yeah, I would just echo that point. I think there's an incredible amount of creative problem solving happening across our group, to Mark's to Mark's point, that's a pretty exciting thing to watch, the innovation occur in real time.
Two great points to end on there. Thank you so much, both of you. It's been great having the perspective from, you know, the global perspective, the UK perspective, the New York perspective. And I think it is, you know, like you were saying, Mark, you know, it's not to make little of what's happened, but I think that approach of looking at how we can make things better going forward is one that is a really important message. So hopefully everyone that's sort of tuning in will take that with them. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Emily.